Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the GME Core Curriculum Podcast, Curriculum Corner, where we explore skills and insights that help shape the next generation of physician leaders. I'm your host, Dr. Arthur Ollendorf, and today we are focusing on an approach to leadership that is both powerful and practical, especially in clinical training environments. Our topic today is appreciative inquiry, a strengths-based way of leading, learning, and improving culture by focusing not only on what needs fixing, but also on what's already working well. This is particularly relevant for residents and fellows because leadership shows up every day in team communications, feedback conversations, patient care, and how we support one another through challenges. To guide us through this conversation, I am honored to be joined by fellow obstetrician, Dr. Manjusha Sani, who brings expertise and experience in appreciative inquiry and its application in healthcare education. Dr. Sani, thank you so much for being here. To start, could you share a bit about your background and what you do to appreciative inquiry? And also, can you share a story where appreciative inquiry helped shift a team, learner, or situation in a positive direction?
Hello, Dr. Ollendorf, and thank you for having me here. Hello, everyone. My name is Manjusha Sani. I'm an OBGYN physician and an attending for the residency program at Carilion Clinic, an associate professor at Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine, and a well-being director for the OBGYN department. In the role of the director of well-being, I've been leading clinician-focused well-being initiatives for my department for more than a decade. Like a lot of healthcare providers, I went through a period of burnout that really made me pause and rethink things. I started focusing on my own well being, and over time, that naturally grew into wanting to support others in the same way. As I went through that journey, I began to notice that many of the challenges we face, both at work and even in our personal lives, seem to come from the way we communicate, especially at times of rapid changes. And it's not necessarily how we communicate and the way we communicate with others, but also how we communicate with ourselves. And this got cemented around the time of COVID when we saw rapid changes in healthcare. People were discouraged, healthcare providers felt isolated, our normal channels of communications were blunted, and there was a lot of negativity in the way the communication was being perceived or even delivered. That realization is what led me to appreciative inquiry. And I actually came upon a book called Conversations Worth Having. If you haven't read that, it would be a really good one to read. It talks about how communication can be delivered in a more strength based way of thinking, especially in the leadership realm. I completed my training in appreciative inquiry in 2021, and pretty quickly I started applying it to something very practical, our monthly departmental meetings. In the past, these meetings were very typical, a lot of top down updates, metrics, and information sharing with not much room for real engagement. One of the first changes we made for the department was simple but powerful. We started by talking about what was going well. We made some space to celebrate both small and big wins, and we invited each division to share something positive happening on their end. And that really shifted the energy in the room. People became more engaged, the tone became more positive, and there was a stronger sense of connection across the department. It changed how people experienced those meetings from something you had to attend to something you actually wanted to be part of and didn't want to miss. It kept the focus on growth, but in a way that felt encouraging instead of discouraging. And honestly, this was a very small shift, but it really changed the energy of the conversation.
So it sounds like a really wonderful tool to be using. And let's take a step back for a second, because I suspect that some of our residents may not know what appreciative inquiry really is and what the basics of it are. So if you could help us all out, who people who are not quite as well versed in it as you are, Dr. Sani, could you just tell us what appreciative inquiry is and how is it different from other problem-solving techniques that we commonly see done in clinical spaces?
So, as you were pertaining to it, Dr. Ollendorf, in your introduction, in simple terms, is just a way of approaching organizational or personal change by focusing on what's already working rather than starting with what's broken. In medicine, we're trying to look for problems. What went wrong? What needs fixing? Where the gaps are? We know the root case analysis and all the things that come along with that. And that's important. But appreciative inquiry flips the starting point. It asks, when are we at our best? What's already going well? And how do we do more of that? So instead of saying, why did this fail? You might ask, when has this worked really well and what made that possible? It's not really about ignoring problems, it's about using strengths and successes as the foundation for improvement. And what that often does is create more engagement, more energy, and more positive team culture while still moving forward towards better outcomes. For example, think about one of those shifts, the kind where we are all exhausted, it's been nonstop, short staffed, alarms going off every few minutes, and that happens in several parts of the hospital. And there's this one patient on the floor that you've been worried about the whole time. And despite everything you do and or the team does, the outcome just isn't what you hoped for. And I've been there, you've been there, standing in that room afterwards when it suddenly gets really quiet. You can feel the weight of it. People are avoiding eye contact, everyone is replaying things in their head. And what's the first thing we think of? What did we miss? Could we have done something sooner or better? Where did we go wrong? And I get it, these are important questions. But in that moment, it can also feel like we are piling on when people are already carrying a lot. Maybe some self doubt, guilt, people second guessing themselves. And it can leave one feeling validated that, oh, we are all in the same boat. But truly, it does make us feel emotionally drained. What appreciative inquiry helped me see is to just shift the conversation a little, not to ignore what happened, but to ask alongside it, where did we actually show up well for that patient? How, as a team, we came together well? Or when did the team really come together? And it's interesting because even in those really tough cases, someone will say, we caught that change early. Or when things escalated, everyone efficiently stepped into their respective roles without too much direction or intervention. And for me, that changes what people take away from that moment. It doesn't take away the sadness, but it reminds us that there was still good care, still teamwork, still things we can build on the next time. And that's what appreciative inquiry does.
That's such a really important distinction because you're right. Traditionally, healthcare has been very focused on what was going wrong. Think about maternal morbidity and mortality, and we look for all the things that didn't go well when there's so many things that may have gone well. Um, so I like to change this up a little bit. You give a great explanation of how it helps in the clinical environment, but how can it be especially helpful to residents and fellows in a clinical learning environment? Where do you see the strengths of this approach being?
I think appreciative inquiry is especially valuable in residency and fellowship because of the kind of environment the learners are in, and we've all been there. It is high pressure, fast paced, and very feedback heavy. But a lot of that feedback can tend to focus on what's not going well and where the person needs to improve. As trainees, you're constantly being evaluated, and over time, that can start to feel like you're always feeling short. And, I've heard a lot of residents complain of feeling not good enough or having that imposter syndrome, even when they're actually growing and doing a lot of things right. What appreciative inquiry does is help rebalance that. It creates space to notice what's working, what a resident did well in a tough situation, when a team communicated effectively, or when someone showed real growth. And that matters because it builds confidence and psychological safety. When people feel seen for what they're doing well, they are more open to learning and more willing to speak up and more engaged overall. I also think it helps shape the kind of leaders our trainees become. The way we teach and give feedback is the way they will lead in the future. If all they experience is deficit based feedback, that's what they will carry forward. But if they learn to recognize strengths and build on them, that becomes part of their leadership style. So for me, appreciative inquiry isn't just about making things feel better. It's actually about creating a more effective learning environment and ultimately better teams and better patient care.
Thanks for sharing that because I think we hear that a lot in our clinical learning environments. I, you know, how can it be better? How can we be focusing on the positives, not the negatives? How can we be looking to be in that growth mindset rather than being in that shame and blame mentality? And I think especially as we have learners who are, are learning, right? And that's allowed, and how we give them that grace um, is so important. So this overview has been very helpful. I think it hopefully frames our next conversation about the how. How does one actually put this into practice? So, are there a few simple appreciative prompts or questions trainees can use immediately maybe at rounds or at sign out or in teaching moments that you might suggest?
Yeah, this is actually my favorite part because that's where this becomes really practical, boots on the ground. You don't really need a big framework. Although, if you look at the original appreciative inquiry framework, it has all these different parts that you're supposed to go through. But in reality, you can start using appreciative inquiry even now. It can be as simple as changing the questions you ask. On rounds, for example, instead of jumping straight to what's missing or what needs to be done, you might ask, what's something that went really well with this patient's care? And this is my favorite one because, when I'm coming on labor and delivery, and you worked with me there at times, I do tend to ask the night team, hey, what was your satisfying moment overnight? It's very easy to turn that conversation from, oh my gosh, it was such a hard night, or this happened or that happened, to, yes, we did have some satisfying moments, or the moments that bring joy for us, and the moments that we really, the moments that really drove us to be here in healthcare field. So during sign out, a simple one can be, what helped things go smoothly today? And that can help focus on teamwork. Or when you're turning to the signing out team, what went well for you and your team, or what was a satisfying moment for you, as I said before. It shifts the tone right away, especially after a busy or stressful shift. And in teaching moments, especially with trainees, I found this really powerful. What part of that did you feel most confident about? And today only, I had a clinic, and I was remembering that I needed to give this podcast. So it was a really great reminder for me to continue doing what I'm doing. And I asked my student, what do you feel good about your learning today? And she was able to summarize what she felt very comfortable and confident about. And then we talked about her strengths, and we talked about where she wanted to go from there. And overall, it was deeply satisfying as a teacher. And I'm hoping that as a student as well for her, because it helps them recognize their own strength, not just wait for us to point out what they need to fix. Another one I use a lot, especially for students working with me, is more forward looking. So, like something like, what's one thing you would want to build on this shift? And so I'd ask them, hey, you've had so many clinic days, and what do you feel like you learned, and will you feel more comfortable, and what do you want to work on today? And just shifts the tone. It makes it more focused on learning, and the student feels more engaged as well. Honestly, these are small shifts, but they really change the energy of the conversation. It becomes, the communication becomes encouraging instead of discouraging, or anticipatory fearfulness around being in new situations. People feel more seen, more engaged, and more open to learning.
That's super helpful. In these podcasts, we really want to give our residents and fellows some really basic things they can take home with them and use right away. So I'm going to push you a little bit further. And as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you a question that's not intended to oversimplify this important work, but what we've learned, it's good that the residents and fellows have something in their back pocket when they need it, when they're, not sure of what's going on. So if you had to have one appreciative question in your back pocket that the residents and fellows could use, what would that be?
So, if I had to pick just one question to keep in your back pocket, it would be this: what's something that went well here? And how can we do more of that? It's simple, but it works in almost any situation, on rounds, after a tough case, during feedback, even in the middle of a busy shift. What I love about that question is that it doesn't ignore challenges, but it shifts your starting point. It helps you and your team recognize what's already working, and it gives you something concrete to build on. And over time, these small moments of noticing and amplifying what's going well, they really do start to change the culture. So here's that question again: what's something that went well here, and how can we do more of that?
Thank you. That's just such a great, simple but powerful tool to use. And I love how it changes that focus. It changes sort of the angle which we're asking our questions, which once again, you said earlier, it sort of becomes the way we do things, right? And how we focus on positives. And there are times to focus on things that may not have gone well, but in general, we do so many good things that we don't give ourselves credit for. So I think, thank you for sharing that. And I really hope our trainees will really find value in that as they move forward. So Dr. Sani, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights into appreciative inquiry and leadership in clinical learning environments. For our residents and fellows listening, I hope today's conversation reminds you that leadership is only about fixing what's wrong. It's also about elevating what's strong, building trust, and helping teams thrive. That's it for this episode of Curriculum Corner. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and most importantly, keep caring. I'm Dr. Arthur Ollendorf, signing off.